silence gets your attention. Silence can be blessed. The silence of a new baby sleeping while the exhausted mother takes a break too. The silence that surrounds when you get into God's Word. Everything kind of fades away whenever you concentrate on what God's talking to you about. The silence of the look of a spouse from across the room. The silence of a hug of a child. All blessed silence. But silence can be terrifying too. I don't know how many times I've seen a group of moms get up and run into the next room because all the kids went silent. Or the sound of an airplane when the motor quits. You can talk to Steve Fraser about that. Or when the lights go out at night. Or if you're camping out and the crickets quit chirping. That'll make the hair stand up on the back of your head. I talked a couple weeks ago about our storms that we had in the Texas Panhandle and how loud they were and how the lightning went from horizon to horizon because there's no trees. There's nothing to stop any of that. It's just wide open country up there. Whenever storms like that would come up, which was not very frequent, we always had a leather satchel that had all their important papers in there. Birth certificates, deeds, titles, insurance papers, all that stuff. And it was right by the back door. We'd capture the dogs up and make sure the dogs was ready to go. They were cats we didn't care about. I tried eventually to try to get anybody to grab one of those cats and take in the cellar, but we didn't even try. They were on their own. And we'd be gathered around. We didn't have radar. We didn't live out in no place. You didn't have nothing out there. And with all the noise of the thunder and lightning and everything that's going on, whenever it went silent, my dad said, go. And down the cellar we'd go. I've been in 3 tornadoes. I don't want to be in another one. But it's pretty scary when that silence hits. So let's read chapter 8, starting in verse 1 of Revelation. It says, when Jesus opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. This is a very solemn scene starting here. Jesus himself orders a halt to all fronts. There is a heavenly hush. There's nobody whispering. There's nobody talking. There's nothing for 30 minutes. I don't know what 30 minutes is in heaven, but John could see that time frame go by. So this silence is a pause in the action, a pause from what we saw the first 6 seals being opened up in chapter 6. This marks the transition from the last chance of salvation to judgment. This is that transition point. So the pattern that we see here is going to be repeated again. The pattern that we see is in chapter 6. You see the 6 seals, the first 6 seals opened. And then there's a pause. The eschatology groups, they call that a parenthesis in chapter 7, where you have the seals being opened and then it stops. There's one more seal to be opened and it stops. And you have chapter 7. And in the literary form, whenever you see a story or whatever writing along, and then all of a sudden you see a word or a phrase or a name, a sentence, sometimes more than a sentence, in parentheses, it's to explain what was just said. Well, that's what chapter 7 is. Chapter 7 is there to help explain what was done in chapter 6. And we're talking about those that's under the altar. Okay? So that's what that's for. It is that explanation of that. We see that again repeated here. We see in chapter 8, we see the seventh seal opened, and then we see trumpets, and the same thing. You'll see 6 trumpets, and then another pause, another parentheses in chapter 10 and half of chapter 11 before we start up with the 7th trumpet again. And those two, when we get to those, look for the explanation of why it's there. It's there. It's some people, when they read through this, they don't understand what that is, and they say, well, I just can't understand it because it just jumps around so much. No, it doesn't jump around. It's fluid. It's moving all the way through. But the parentheses, when you understand it that way, of chapter 7 and of chapter 10 and 11 and a half, it kind of helps you fill in the blanks of that. So we have the 7 seals, 6 are open, and then we have that pause. Same way with the trumpets. So in verse 2 of chapter 8, John says, and I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Look at the tense of that phrase there. The 7 angels who stand. Doesn't say stood. Doesn't say will stand. It's not past. It's not present. Or future. It's present. That stand before God. 7 of them that stand before God. Now, where have we seen that before? Everybody go to Luke. Luke chapter 1. Zechariah's in the temple. It's his course. Remember we talked about the 24 courses and the 24 elders, and it was Zechariah's course that he was there on duty, and he saw an angel. And in verse 19 of chapter 1, the angel answered, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I'm guessing that one of those 7 that we're seeing here is Gabriel. That is present tense, both places. I stand in the presence of God. Michael, maybe? I don't know. We don't know any other angels' names. But that's what we see here. So verse 3, another angel, remember this is not Jesus, another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense together with the prayers of the saints went up before God from the angel's hand. Where's the church?
In heaven.
We are in heaven. What are we told in the New Testament that Jesus is to the church? The mediator, the intercessory. Our prayers don't go straight to God, they go to Jesus, and Jesus passes them on, right? He's the mediator between God and man. Correct? Okay. So whose prayers are these? It's not the church's. We're in heaven. We're in the presence of God when this takes place. Okay? Go back to chapter 6. On that 5th seal, verse 9, I saw under the altar, the altar is in front of the throne, the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood. Chapter 7. We'll skip down to verse 13. Then one of the elders asked me, these in white robes, who are they and where do they come from? I answered, sir, you know. And he said, these are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, therefore. All right. We're going to go back and fill out in a little bit more too. Verse 4, chapter 8. The smoke of the incense together with the prayers of the saints went up before God from the angel's hand. These are the prayers that we see in chapter 6. How long, O Lord, how long before you avenge us? These are those prayers that's about to go up. And like I said at the end of of last week. Jesus died. His blood was shed. We, through faith, believe that. And that's our salvation. Correct? Did we shed our blood to get that salvation? No. How did we get that? By the blood of Jesus and Jesus alone do we get that salvation. By accepting that, by having faith in that. We read in chapters 6 and 7 that those that come out of the tribulation, yes, there's going to be some of those saved in tribulation. People go, well, the Spirit has to be there too because nobody comes are called by the Spirit. Different salvation, different dispensation. They are not called. They realize they messed up. They realize that the only way that they can get salvation is through their blood. They have to be martyred. They did not accept Jesus shedding his blood. Now they have to, through their martyring. And that's what they did. And it says there in chapter 7 again that they washed their robes. Jesus gives us our robes through his blood. Make sense? Okay. So that's what these prayers are. These prayers are offered up, and the tribulation saints have prayed, avenge us. The people of earth have rejected Jesus and now must bear judgment for their sins. These prayers are fixing to be answered. The avenging of that. Right here at the beginning of verse 4 in chapter 5, this is the beginning of the great tribulation, the great reckoning, the great vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. This is where it starts. You think that through the first portion of the seal that would be bad. I mean, in what was it, the fourth seal? A fourth of the population gone? Just saw that we just hit, supposedly they think, 8 billion people on the planet now. A fourth of them gone. That's 2 billion. And that's not counting the people that's raptured. Hopefully, I would love it if the other 6 billion were raptured. But let's just think of it realistically. What if 2 billion? What if 2 billion people are gone instantly? Along with the 2 billion from the fourth seal. Half the planet's population is gone. We'll talk about that again here in a minute. But this is where the Great Tribulation starts. Verse 5. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth, and there came peals of thunder, rumblings, and flashes of lightning, and an earthquake, and the King James adds, and voices. I don't know. Is it the voices of the tribulation saints? I don't know. The King James Version puts that in there. Verse 6. The half hour is over. This is the solemn moment. Again, the prayers of the saints have been heard. The order to proceed is being given. With the first trumpet, divine wrath is about to be delivered to rebellious men. So before we read this, we as Christians, we as the bride, need to understand that our concern should not be fear of what we're about to read. Should not be like, oh, woe was me. Don't stay up night thinking about this. You will be there. What should keep you up at night is your neighbor is going to have to live through that. We're in missions month. I mean, what a great time to do that, to understand that there's a lost world out there that will have no hope, none at all. And I know I've said this before in here. I think I know everybody here. If you don't know Jesus, please come talk to one of us. If you're on YouTube and you're watching that, find somebody to talk to. You do not want to be here when these things happen. So to calm the church, to calm us, let's go to Deuteronomy real fast. Like before we start, let's just read something. In Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29, it says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may follow all the words of the law." The secret things are God's, and he reveals things to us that we need to know. So why would we want to read Revelation? Well, A, he said we get a blessing if we do, and B, he's revealing things to us. Revealing things to us that will spur us on to do his work. That's my explanation on that. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8. "The Lord himself goes before you." He did. "And he will be with you." He is. Through the Holy Spirit now. "He will never leave you or forsake you." He's promised us that. Who thinks that we're going to live any part of the tribulation? When you read that verse right there. He will not leave you or forsake you. "Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged." Now, these incidences, not plagues, these are things that happen. They are real. They're not imagery. They're not symbolism. Remember I told you in chapter 1, when we first started, that if there's some symbolism, it will be explained what it means. If it's not explained, it is what it is. Chapter 7, it talks about the 144,000. It didn't explain that any more than it's just the 12 tribes of the Jews, right? It's not symbolism. It is what it is. It means that. But yet, those in the white robe, the elder explained what they were. So if it needs an explanation, you've got it, and it'll do that. None of these trumpets have explanations. They are what they are. So verse 7, "The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up. A third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up." You not have to worry about mowing anymore. It says all of the green grass. So what did God make on the third day? Let's go back to Genesis 1. Genesis 1. The first thing he made, first day, sky. Or light. Light. Second day was sky. So, starting in verse 9. "And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and the dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning the third day. And with the sound of a trumpet, a third of the trees is gone. A third of the land is gone." Now, we're several chapters away from chapter 17. But we're going to talk about Babylon. And people say, well, yeah, it's got to be Rome. Who says Rome's even going to be there? A third of the land's gone with one trumpet. The land, when this happens, is not going to look like it does today. You got to get that out of your head. Oh, yeah, well, New York's going to be there. Probably not. So I told you in chapter 1, use your mind's eye to visualize these things. See what John is seeing here. So in the first global judgment, God used water. Now we see with this trumpet here, he uses fire. Something different. Second trumpet, verse 8 and 9. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Notice what he says here. He says something like a mountain. He doesn't say a mountain. Something like a mountain was thrown into the sea, all ablaze, on fire. And a third of the sea is gone, turns to blood. A third of the sea life is gone, and a third of the ships are destroyed. I've read people and talked and looked, and they're convinced that that's an atomic bomb. Got to be an atomic bomb. I don't think so. The reason why, now God gave man the knowledge to make an atomic bomb, the material to make an atomic bomb, but it still takes man to push that button. That's man's wrath. Man's wrath. And these things that we're going to read here, it's God's wrath. That makes it different. That makes it the tribulation. That it's God's wrath. God is doing this however he wants to, but with his creation, he's doing this. And we're going to see into that. So, I talked about the late Reverend Vernon McGee. He said that he doesn't know what this is, and frankly, he doesn't care. He said he's not going to be here reading the evening paper when it hits. And it was true. He's already gone on to see the Lord. But I disagree with that. I think that we need to see what that is. We need to understand. We need to see how God's mind works in this. And he's given us everything that we need to know. So I got some interesting stuff here. Well, that goofy thing, it's going to make me redo it.
You have to start a 7-day free trial.
I'm going to have to try that. Yeah, see what it makes you do? We're going to go back here. Well, that goofy thing. There we go. You ever seen this thing before? You can track every airplane that's in the air right now, worldwide. Every airplane. And you can see them moving, which is really pretty fun. You can see heavies, you can see little ones, and you can watch them move as they cross over. They start moving across up there. You see helicopters. See right there the helicopter moving. Pretty cool stuff. All over the world, you see that. Well, how come John didn't say anything about any of the airplanes disappearing?
Probably already gone.
He wouldn't have any idea what they were, but I just said that 4 billion people are gone. Pilots, attendants, fuelers, maintenance, air traffic controllers, vehicles to get you to the airport. There's no jet fuel anymore. There's nothing flying. That's why. All those things are gone. They're on the ground. What happened during the Twin Towers? Every airplane in the world was down. We thought that we couldn't get toilet paper. We couldn't get baby formula. We couldn't get all this kind of stuff because nobody was working. No truck drivers. What do you think is going to happen whenever this happens? I think airplanes are going to be the least of our worries. There's not going to be anything there. That's ships.
Wow.
Ships that's on the water right now. And if you look right over here in this corner right here, 336,000 on the water right now. And a third of them will be gone. 110,000 will be gone. And you can zoom in on all those, and you can look all over, and you can just see how they're moving. Oh. And it's gone. Why does that thing do that to me?
I don't know, whoever that is, they're in trouble.
You touch the wrong thing, and it just goes crazy. But you can see them in the rivers. You can see the Mississippi River here. I mean, they're just everything that's out there. So I want you to look at that area that's on the eastern seaboard of the United States all the way over to Africa, Western Africa, all the way down south. Just look at that area there. My trade is I'm in geophysics. I've been in geophysics for a long time. 35, 40 years, I don't know, I lost count, including the oil patch. Play with dirt. Has anybody ever heard of La Palma? La Palma. It's an island. La Palma came on my screen about 25 years ago at a geophysical conference. And it was old news then to them, but it was new news to me. And for the past 25 years, I've kind of kept up with La Palma because of the geophysical wonder that it is. I deal with seismic faults. I go to Houston a bunch. Thousands of holes drilled down in the Houston area tracing out faults that's going all over the place. Big lawsuit in Woodlands right now because people didn't do it right. So I know what a fault is. I know what a scarp is of the fault. And I know what happens whenever they slip. So I'm going to show you this video. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long. And it will tell you where La Palma is and what is significant about La Palma. I think that's about 1/3 of the ships. I don't know. But when you put them both together, God is using his creation to carry out his judgment. He tells us what's going to happen. So I've heard people say, well, that's a meteor. I don't think so. I think this would be a good explanation. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. God has not told me what he's going to do. But he has given us ideas like La Palma. Things that's out there. We have no clue. None. So just be aware that God's plans are definite, and how he carries them out is his sovereign will. And we won't be here. Remember that. So let's go on to the next one. So verse 10 and 11. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star blazing like a torch fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. More than likely a meteor. More than likely. Wormwood means bitter. I mean, that's just the plain out of it. That's what its thing is. A third of the rivers, fountains, springs, fresh water. A third become bitter, and many die. Go to Exodus. Exodus chapter 15. We see a lot of times in the Old Testament where God prepares us for the New Testament. So, in verse 22 of chapter 15, we'll start. So then Moses led Israel away from the Dead Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. Look at that, a parenthesis. It's explaining that. You see that? That is why the place is called Mara, because Mara means bitter. Verse 24. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Now we see the reverse of that, where all the water was sweet, and now it comes back to being bitter. You can't drink it. So again, I don't know. I'm like Reinhold, that German friend of mine. Don't know. Meteor more than likely. I shared this with my Sunday school class a couple of years ago when it came out. 2013, NASA scientists are out there looking at the near-Earth orbit of meteors and asteroids and stuff, and they go, "Ooh, found one." And so immediately they did the calculations on it to see what its orbit was going to be. Wasn't good. The orbit showed that it was going to hit the Earth. And they hushed it up. Did anybody hear about this in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016? No. And you know what those evil-minded scientists named this particular meteor? Apophis. Apophis, an Egyptian god of chaos, destruction, calamity. And that's what those idiots named this asteroid, Apophis. Well, it came news whenever, and this is exactly what it said, they recalculated pi, and this near-Earth orbit, not going to come close. Not going to come close. My immediate aspect was, pi is constant. How do you recalculate pi? 3.14, and it keeps going. How do you do that? Well, NASA didn't listen to me, but they listened to other people that were smart, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's not what we meant. We didn't mean that." And they recalculated it again, and they're like, "Well, yeah, it's going to come close, but it's not going to hit the Earth. It's going to be close." I'm not going to tell the year, because why? But the day that it's supposed to do its thing is April the 13th, which happens to be a Friday. Friday the 13th. Isn't that something? I don't know. Well, I'm not going to tell you the year. I'll tell you privately. I'm not going to tell it over there. So here, look, you guys are going to try to get me in trouble. So if I can get that. Can you see that? It's not showing very clear there. If it was in focus, that says Apophis, is what it says. And that is their recalculated pi trajectory outside of our satellite band. No big deal. What they have now, which they don't even have an animation for, is it's on this side of the satellite band. Yeah, it's going to be pretty spectacular. Y'all can see it. Y'all sure enough see it. I bet you we will if you're here. I'm not saying that's what it is. Not even going to come close to saying that. I'm just saying that there's stuff out there that you have to be aware of, that God knows exactly where every one of those pieces of space rock are. And he knows how to put them exactly where he wants them, when he wants them. Is that going to happen? I don't know. Another one of those possibilities of what can happen. And we're doing time. All right. So, verse 12. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. Go to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. This is Jesus talking. He said, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Go to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 13. Starting in verse 6. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Because of this, all hands will go limp. Every man's heart will melt. Terror will seize them. Pain and anguish will grip them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at each other, their faces aflame. See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty, and will humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make man scarcer than pure gold, more rare than gold of Ophir. Therefore, I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place at the wrath of the Lord Almighty and the day of his burning anger. No way around it. The earth is not going to look the same when this takes place. And we thought the first 4 trumpets were cataclysmic. Verse 13. As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other 3 angels. In Matthew 23, Jesus gives 7 woes to the Pharisees. We just hear that there's woe, woe, woe. You thought the first 4 was bad? Buckle up, Buttercup. You ain't seen nothing yet.